Hello, and welcome to When Docs Talk. Hello, everyone. Welcome to When Docs Talk. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome, welcome. We are When Docs Talk, and who we are is a collaborative of emergency physicians and practitioners, as well as nurses. And we're here to talk about whatever's on your mind, from healthcare to politics to current events. Today, we are talking about racism. This is actually part 3 of our 3-part series. This is an emergency. Racism from the Frontlines. We are all frontline workers, and we submit to you that racism is a public health issue. It is everyone's issue, because if we are all not free, if we are all not justly treated, no one really is. And so we decided to have this 3-part series. Those of you who joined us for the first one, we talked about stories, and we had the stories of several emergency physicians of color. We talked about our experiences. We talked about our patients' experiences. Part 2, which you all joined us for, some of you, was supporters. We actually had allies, people who are non-Black, talk to us about their sentiments about what's going on in this nation, and talked about ways that we can help each other and build that allyship. But this episode is one that I'm really excited about, because I heard from a lot of you, and a lot of you felt like we do a lot of talking, just in general, as a nation, as a people. We do a lot of crying, we do a lot of praying, we do a lot of things that don't feel actionable. And so in this series, in this particular episode, this is an emergency strategies. We want to make you all feel equipped that there are things that can be done. Rome wasn't built in a day. It's not going to be one thing alone. It may be a collection of things that we need to do, and we need to do it collectively. If not us, who? If not now, when? That's the question. And so I know that some people say, listen, I don't have the energy to get out there and protest in the street. That might not be your role. Some people say, you know what, I really don't know what to do. Some people say, I don't think voting helps. There's a lot of talk. So let's stop talking too much. We'll talk a little bit, but we'll talk about action. We have a wonderful panel of guests today that are going to be talking to us about the different spheres in which we can move to exact change. So whether you're going to hit racism from the business aspect with your dollars, whether you're going to do it by voting, by running, whether you're going to do it by catching the attention of your local politicians, or whether you just need to educate yourself and know a little bit more about the criminal justice system and the different points along the criminal justice system that you can intervene, you have a role. So pick a position, play a role, and join us today. Before I do that, I want to bring on my lovely co-hosts. Welcome, welcome, ladies.
Hello.
Do y'all want to say hello to our viewers and let them know who you are for those who are joining for the first time?
Hey, my name is Morgan. I'm sorry, Dr. P. My name is Morgan. I am a nurse in Atlanta, Georgia, originally hailed from Brooklyn, New York. I am so glad to be a part of this project, and I look forward to an insightful conversation today.
Great.
So hi, I'm Dr. Sonia Pinson. I'm born and raised here in Georgia. I'm trained in family medicine, working in an ER setting, and I am a U.S. Navy veteran. I'm very glad to be here this evening, and I'm hoping after everyone takes a look at the show that they can maybe figure out, you know, what kind of avenue or what modality that they can actually join this struggle, this fight towards racial justice and racial equality.
Hey, everybody. I'm Tawny Jackson. I'm a travel emergency medicine provider. I am excited for this show because sometimes I feel a little bit ill-equipped, and I'm hoping to learn a lot from this show today.
Welcome, Tani.
Hey guys, I'm Yolanda Harrison. I'm a family medicine physician like Sonia working in the ER setting. I am from New Orleans by way of Arkansas, which was my last post. And I am looking forward to having useful information. I feel like we have a lot of information, but we don't have a lot of useful information that we can take, make it tangible, make it work for us. I'm looking forward to that today.
Excellent. And some of you who've been watching from the beginning of When Docs Talk are seeing a few missing faces. So I wanted to just say that Davida couldn't join us today because she is actively on the front lines working. And last time, if you watched, you might have heard me reference this, but our own Liz Iladare had a baby boy last month. We are all congratulating her on the birth of baby boy Jonah. Congratulations, Liz. That's why she couldn't join us today. I do want to launch into our racism series, but before I do that, I just want to talk a little bit about what's in the news, because there's some things that have come up and we in the medical field can't ignore it. As much as racism is a public health issue, it is a very important issue that we need to address. We can't ignore the elephant in the room that is coronavirus. And so we want to just say a few words about that and talk about some other current events that we think might be pertinent. Let's tell us where we are today, right now, in terms of coronavirus.
As of today, there are approximately 21.5 million cases worldwide and roughly 770,000 deaths in the U.S. alone. In the U.S. alone, there are greater than 5 million cases of coronavirus and greater than 169,000 deaths. Since late July, the U.S. has been averaging about 1,000 deaths from coronavirus daily.
1,000 deaths a day since late July. So it's real. For those of you who doubt, it's still here. It's still an issue. And we really have to think about this with all our brains. Every collective brain cell needs to think about how we're going to live with this, because it seems like something that's not going away. Okay. Now, one thing that was on a lot of your minds that I've heard on our website and also just emails is the whole situation with coronavirus and schools, right? Our children went back to school, for those who have children, and it's not easy. I made the decision to not have my children go in person. They are schooling virtually. I have a 7th grader and a 3rd grader, and I have a 2.5-year-old. He's not in school per se, but he had the option of going, and I decided to keep them home because I don't think that there's quite enough done yet to make it safe. However, we'll see, because we do think it's important for kids to get back to school. Let's talk a little bit about that. I think that, Connie, you had some information you wanted to share with our viewers about COVID-19 in children.
Right. So the American Academy of Pediatrics says that there's about a 90% increase in COVID-19 cases in kids just in the past 4 weeks alone, which is a pretty shocking number. Severe symptoms and death, however, are pretty rare amongst kids with COVID-19. With kids representing about less than 0.4% of all COVID-19 deaths, as in not even 1%. However, this does not mean that children are immune. Ipe just talked a little bit about virtual versus in-person schooling and just some of the decisions that we have to take into consideration when deciding on sending our kids back to school versus doing virtual education. And it's a lot to consider.
It is. One thing I want to talk about is we often talk about school and kids and coronavirus. We talk about it from the perspective of parents who don't want their children to go back, but we really have to think about it also from the perspective of teachers, because our teachers are also expressing concern. Some teachers are of older age, some teachers have comorbidities. And so there's 2 parts to this story. It's not just about keeping the kids safe, which is a very important thing, but we also have to consider the teacher safety. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about what's going on in terms of teachers and COVID-19.
So approximately 3 weeks ago, the American Federation of Teachers, which represents 1.7 million school employees, issued a resolution saying it will support any local chapter that decides to strike over reopening plans. However, the union states that the strike should be considered only as a last resort if conditions are not met before schools open. It states that the building should reopen only in areas with lower virus rates, only if schools require masks, update ventilation systems, and makes changes to space students apart. Cities like Chicago, Boston, New Jersey, and other cities across the United States have had sit-ins or been on the brink of strike.
Right. I mean, what do you all think about that? I certainly understand that they want to be safe. You think those are reasonable demands?
Yes.
I think that they're really nice demands. I think they're being real nice. I've said before, the two jobs I can't have is a teacher and a policeman. And if I was a teacher right now, I would be fired because I would go in with a long list of demands with some profanity in them. And
yeah, you'd definitely be fired. That profanity from around our kids. Stop you, Yolanda. See, you muted yourself. Good. All right. The last issue that's kind of trending when it comes to coronavirus. So we hear about the numbers and we hear about the kids going back to school and the new cases in kids. We hear about teachers and so forth. We also hear about masks. Masks are becoming like a polarizing issue. You know, it's like, do you wear a mask or do you not? Do you believe in masks or not? I mean, it's even caused death in some situations. People have actually shot at people who have asked them to wear a mask. So I know, Tani, tell us more about it. Tell us about masks.
So masks have become kind of this polarized, politicized issue. They are very effective in decreasing the spread of droplets, which is how we know that COVID-19 spreads. And there are studies now, we know that this disease is relatively new, that shows that the mask actually decrease the spread of COVID-19, especially when you combine it with other things such as hand washing or social distancing. So it's a part of the complement that we have to prevent the spread of disease. I'm sad that people are politicizing this.
Absolutely. I think the long and short of it is this. Like we said, it's here. It's not going away for a while. There's a lot of talks of vaccines. I'm not even going to get into the literature about vaccines because I think it's still too early. I know that there's kind of a race. I know that Russia says they have a vaccine. I know that the US says that they're hopeful about having a vaccine soon, and I'm not quite sure when that means. But I do know that until that comes, I think all of you are right. We need to have common sense about it. We know it's transmitted by droplets. We know that these droplets are transmitted in respiratory secretions, which can come out not just with sneezing and coughing, but just talking. And so masks help. It almost seems, common sense, but I'm glad that we have literature to back it up in respectable journals. So I think we need to wear masks, social distance, and hand wash. And I think that's just our platform.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to say it's just an unnecessary defiancy. You know what I mean? Like, why refuse? It's just a simple gesture. Just put the mask on. You know, we're not asking you to donate.
I've heard some people say they feel like they're not getting enough oxygen. They feel
that they have masks that help with that. You know, there are masks that enable you to breathe better.
So I think a lot of people, it's still political, regardless of whatever we say scientifically. It's really it's along political lines and what people feel politically, unfortunately. And people can't look beyond that and actually look at the science and the evidence.
Okay, I agree. One other thing I wanted to talk about just briefly before we bring on our guest is something that happened yesterday, literally in my backyard. So for those of you who are joining us from outside of Georgia, most of us are from Georgia. And by the way, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I didn't even introduce myself. I'm Dr. Adrian Apo. I am an emergency physician, born and raised in Miami, Florida, but I live here in Atlanta, Georgia now for the past few years, and I'm so happy to be here. So I live near Stone Mountain Park. Stone Mountain Park, which you just saw, I'll show it again. This is an embedded in a very large mountain, Stone Mountain, made of granite. It is the largest Confederate memorial in the United States. Yesterday, just down the street, there was a big rally. There were two people represented. There were people who represented, Confederate preservation. Okay, so people who were against taking down Confederate flags, against taking down monuments that are dedicated to the Confederacy. And then there were people from Black Lives Matter and also, I believe, Antifa. And it created a lot of strife. There was actually some violence that took place. I understand that nobody was arrested and there was nobody killed, but both sides were armed. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, this is just down the street. I've taken my kids to this park several times. This racial tension is just not going away. And we have to do something about it before it escalates to the point that we're just killing each other. It's not necessary. And the thing that makes me sad about it is that it's been going on too long. I'm sad that we're still exactly here after all that's happened before us, which brings me to my next point. Over here, we talked about him last time. This is the late U.S. Representative John Lewis, who passed away just last month. And we're very sad to lose him because he did a lot of things for this nation, people of all color. And he was a pioneer, actually, in the civil rights movement. This is him with my son in Washington, D.C., my oldest son in Sidibe. And John Lewis told us, he said, don't get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not a struggle of just one day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never ever be afraid to make some noise and get in some good trouble, necessary trouble. So I'm hoping that we're going to get into a little bit of good trouble today. Let's go ahead and bring on our first guest.
All right, Ms. Adrian Johnson is an attorney, social justice advocate, and trial advocacy instructor. She has served as public defender for the last 6 years and represents clients accused of felony offenses. Ms. Johnson earned her bachelor's degree from Furman University and her law degree at Washington University in St. Louis. In her spare time, Ms. Johnson's been a mentor to several youth in her high school alma mater, serving as a youth volleyball coach there for the past 10 years. Additionally, she continues to research, write, and train organizations in areas related to implicit bias and colorism.
All right. Adrian, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Doing great. How about yourself?
I can't complain.
Wonderful. We are so happy to have you here. And let me tell you, I'm going to be the first to feign ignorance when it comes to a lot of the criminal justice system. I feel like it's this system that just eludes most of us. And we're like, I don't know who does what. What do we need to do to stay out of trouble? If we do get in trouble, whom do we call? And more importantly for our viewers, in this criminal justice system, which many people have acknowledged is not just for everybody, particularly people of color, how can we, the people, even if we're not involved personally, like if we don't have any case out, how can we intervene to make sure that just people are along in that pathway? So I'm hoping that you'll shed some knowledge on that for us today.
Yeah, I always get questions from folks when there is some tragedy, when there is some media event, and we're always talking about how we engage the criminal justice system, but we do that after there's some incident that has a bunch of media attention. And one of the things that I wish we would understand is there are sort of ordinary injustices every day that happen just like the ones that we see on TV. And I wish people would think about and engage the criminal justice system in a way that acknowledges that this happens every day all over the country. And there are lots of ways we can do that. And we talk a lot about voting. We talk a lot about educating yourself. And that's something that truly can be done if you are thinking about and care about what is happening in the criminal legal system.
Absolutely.
So really, when you're hearing that, I guess, how would we go about in doing that? Would that be something when we're voting for our local DA, our local city councils? Are those the people that are going to implement some of that, or who do we need to vote for?
Yeah, so I think that there are a number of people, right? One of the things that we always think about first when we think about the criminal legal system is about police themselves. Obviously, we're not electing the police who are on the street, but when you think about your local government, the mayor, the city councilman, those are the people who appoint police chiefs. Mm-hmm. So that matters. Their election matters because they are making sort of downstream decisions that will ultimately affect how your community is being policed. The DA, prosecutors, and solicitor generals are elected for the most part. So we can engage them. And if you are a person who cares about the criminal legal system, you can ask them. There are a number of questions you can ask of these candidates to ensure that they have goals that you have for your own community. Judges in most places are elected. And so when we're talking about sentencing disparities, when we're talking about bonds, when we're talking about decisions being made when presiding over a case, those judges are elected officials. And then, this is not necessarily an elected position, but one of the things you can think about is the public defender system itself. one of the very first things that we decided to protect for folks is the right to counsel. And that's a very important right. It's a right that we don't think about often if we are not ourselves entangled in the criminal legal system. But having an organization of people, of attorneys who care about the rights of other folks is incredibly important.
Yes, absolutely. I often feel like we don't know who does what. And maybe we don't need to, right? Maybe that's why we're happy to have attorneys like yourself. But in that pathway, since so many of them are people that you're saying we would vote for, right, or elect, who should we really know? Like, what positions do you find that a lot of people who are lay people, if you will, don't really know much about that we should know about? We should know what they do and who they are. Which of those positions would you say those are?
I certainly think that people should be familiar with who the district attorneys are in their area, not just because you are electing these people and you should know about the people you're casting a vote for, but these are people who not only make decisions about which charges are being brought, but they represent you. They represent, whenever a prosecutor stands up, they represent a state versus an individual. So if you are not the other named individual, they are representing you as a member of a community. So I think that's important. The other thing too is prosecutors have discretion. They can make choices that other parties can't make. So for instance, if we understand that we've got issues with, let's say, young people getting into trouble for minor crimes, they can implement programs, diversion programs, where they are sort of giving young people a chance to move forward without a criminal record. They can make decisions that protect the community at large, that don't necessarily involve incarcerating people.
Okay.
So that's a big one. Judges too, right? And we all think about judges as somebody that we want to stay away from because we don't want to be involved in the criminal legal system, right? But judges are also decision makers for other things that matter to you. Sure. Things like child custody, divorce, protective orders, all of those things matter to us or people we love at some point. And so knowing who your judges are is incredibly important.
I wanted to ask, what would you say to someone who has gotten disheartened by their past voting experience?
Yeah, I think that each of us have had that experience, right? Each of us has cast a ballot for a candidate that did not win. And each of us has the experience, myself has the experience of giving money to a candidate who has not won, right? And it's easy to just feel disconnected from the process. What I do tell people all the time is look to things like these local elections. Look to things like the people in your community. We often think of elections as presidential elections, right? And we get rallied around these every 4 years voting for the president. But the people in front of you and in your community, like your city council members, your prosecutors, your judges, affect your everyday life all the time. And that's where you really can make changes and where we see these tiny margins of victory. And so your vote really does, sometimes we have elections where people win by 20 votes. So it matters. It does.
Definitely.
A lot of people ask, from the perspective of a defense attorney, in cases like, let's say, Ahmaud Arbery, what went wrong? What happened? Where along that pathway are we seeing this amount of injustice? Like, how is it that somebody was killed on the street, murdered, and the assailants were not even arrested until months later?
I think the question of what went wrong, it depends on how far back we want to move, right? But in situations like that, you have decision makers at a lot of turns. And they're the same decision makers I've been talking to you about earlier, right? Police make decisions and investigate crimes and think through things. Judges decide things like setting bond early in processes. Prosecutors make charging decisions or give police recommendations. And so what we saw, particularly with the Ahmaud Arbery case, is sort of people, I will say, not thinking through their responsibilities as carefully as we would hope that they would.
Gotcha. And what about people? This was a question that came in too. What about people who, let's say they talk about the coroner, the medical examiner. There are some of our viewers and also some people in my family who wonder if there's any bias in the reports that they give when it comes to instances of police shootings, because we saw a lot of discrepancies between the reports in the George Floyd case. And I want to know if that's another system that we can intervene on, because I understand that some of these people are either appointed or elected, the people who are doing the autopsies on in these cases. Is that correct?
Yes. So often coroners are elected, and what people don't know is coroners are not necessarily medical professionals. And so, this could be just someone from a community who is ambitious and wants this job. Medical examiners usually are trained medical professionals.
Okay.
But, should that job be done without bias? Absolutely. Yes, it should. Can bias seep in? Yes. Does it? Yes, it happens every day to all of us. So it certainly can happen in that profession. And so you think about who they interact with, who they work with on a regular basis, and some alliances can form.
Sure. The last thing I want to ask is, if you had 3 points that you think our viewers could intervene on in the criminal justice system to somehow impact racism, what would they be? Just 3 tangible things that they could do.
The biggest one, I think, is to engage your elected officials. If you care about criminal justice reform, engage your elected officials on the important questions. And so if someone says that they're progressive or that they are seeking reform, ask them, push them on what that means. What are they doing? What are they doing about disparities? What questions are they asking of officers who are accused of misconduct? What are they doing to engage the community around them? So I would hold those folks accountable. The other thing that I would say is treat elections for your district attorneys and your judges as you would for a president, because they affect you just as much. And the last is, I would say, pay attention to the inequities in the criminal justice system and be vocal about them. If you see something, it is perfectly reasonable to reach out to those elected officials and tell them that that is your concern, because they represent you as a community member. So if you have a concern about disparities in your area, it is reasonable to tell folks that.
Absolutely. And I'm so happy that you mentioned that, because we actually have people who work in politics, and they will be joining us soon so we can talk about the best ways to reach out to them. Okay. I really appreciate your coming here. I hope you'll stick around, because we might want to ask you a few questions later, but we're going to move on to our next guest. Thanks so much, Adrian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So our next guest, we have Mr. Michael Brown. Michael Brown is a Black entrepreneur from Seattle, Washington. He attended Harvard University, and he focuses his time in investing in businesses of underrepresented populations to scale ownership in these communities. He's always focused on rolling out projects to help with social impact, and we're very happy to have him here to talk to us a little bit about the tech world and how we can influence or impact racism from that perspective. Welcome, Michael.
Oh, hey, thanks for having me.
How's it looking out there in Seattle?
It's sunny. It's sunny, so that's good.
Awesome. We're so happy to have you here. And the first question we wanted to ask you was about this webpage, or I don't know if you consider it an app in some regards, called Police Window. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. During when the protests were going on, for me, I have some people in my family that are high risk around COVID. And so, I didn't feel like I could go out and protest and be part of that process. And so I was trying to figure out, what could I do that could be helpful? And the more I looked into policing and the way policing is managed and the incentives around policing, I started to realize it's a very opaque process. Like, if you want to know how policing is in your community and how your community feels about policing and how that feedback loop works between the police departments and the citizens, I just found this big void. It seemed like there was something missing, where it's like almost like the departments didn't want the feedback or don't know about a way to get the feedback, and citizens didn't have a good way to give it. And so wanted to be careful because there's lots of places where you can go and complain about police, right? And so
Right.
forums, but you really need to roll out something that's a little more collaborative, where it says, hey, look, I get it. You have a service you're doing to the community, but you should want that feedback if you want to service that community well. So I always feel like there's a little too much focus on the protect side and not enough on the serve side when it comes to policing. And then and so I launched a platform that was meant to attract feedback from citizens, but also was meant to be adopted by departments. And so what Police Window is anytime you have an interaction with a police officer, whether you're pulled over, whether you're at a community event, after that interaction, you can put the police officer's name or badge number in, and you can give a review on how that police officer's conduct was, what that process was like for you. Would you be comfortable if that officer was policing your friends and family? And so it's just a way to start to give some actual feedback to the departments. And then you can break that down by your local community that you're in and by your race and gender. So you can really break things down in a way where it says, okay, hey, if even in like a South Seattle neighborhood for the Black community, like how do they feel the police are protecting and serving their community? Are they happy with that service? Do they believe police conduct themselves well? And so you can start to slice down into a more local way. And the more that data is localized and specific to communities, I think the more actionable it is to improve policing.
Is that data available to users when they open the app? Like, hey, can I see that this cop is notorious for X? Or is this information that's collected only being given back to the policing entity? Yeah,
that's a great question. I think there was a lot of debate about that when we rolled out, right? Like, so what we did initially was we made it so that a police officer's information is not publicly given, but you can actually see at a department level and a regional level how, like, the reviews about policing and how that's going. Now, the department themselves do see that information, and also approved community organizations can see that information as well. So if you have a community leader that says, hey, we see there's a problem here, we want to talk to the department collaboratively and solve that problem, they can do that. Now, the other option too is for a police department, which we think is a really strong statement, is a police department could come out and say, hey, we want that information public because we want transparency. And so they can, at their regional level, make it public, and then we'll surface that information.
I'm curious though, since you're saying that, how has this been received by?
Yeah, I think it's interesting.
Wanting to publish this information?
Yeah, it's actually been it's been interesting because I'm a big fan of transparency when you're trying to solve a problem, right? It's like, hey, let's just kind of have it out there. The data might not look great, but let's just kind of get it out there, and then let's start working on it. Let's start moving the needle a little at a time. We were actually contacted by the Seattle Police Department, and they have rolled our system into an internal proposal around the re-envisioning of Seattle policing. Now, there's been, obviously, if you're watching the news, there's been some shakeup and things happening in the Seattle Police Department. So, but we're in the mix right now, and we're going to be launching a campaign as a reach out campaign pretty soon to reach around. I've talked to Kirkland's a local community here. They already are starting to try to solicit more feedback. But when you look at how police departments are measured, how citizens rate their policing is not generally a part of their measurement. A lot of the measurement is crime rate. What's the crime rate, right? And so if you're a police department and your incentive is to stamp down crime rate, a lot of bias can come into how you decide to do that. You can get crime rate down by mass incarceration, versus education and social, economic equality. So there's some incentives that I don't like as well in the way that we view policing. So I really like the idea of, hey, how do citizens generally broadly feel about how police conduct themselves and how policing is serving their community?
Absolutely. I'm really happy that you're kind of from the tech world. Remind me, we went to school together, but tell me.
That's right.
Were you computer science? I forget.
That's right. Yeah, I was computer science. Yeah.
So I want to bring somebody else who's also involved kind of like in social media and marketing. She was a guest on our show earlier. I want you to stay on here because I want us all to have a discussion about how we can use technology, social media, and other things in this fight against social and racial injustice. So with that, if you stay put, I'd like to tell our viewers a little bit about Kamala, rhymes with koala, I remember that. Avila Salmon. She was actually born in Kingston, Jamaica, raised in New York City, and her career thus far spans marketing and entrepreneurial endeavors in both music, film, even television, streaming, and board games. After graduating with honors from Harvard, she followed her passion for music back to New York and began her career in entertainment for RCA Records and Bad Boy Records. She took a short break from the entertainment industry to attend Harvard Business School, where she got her MBA and actually invented a board game. And post-graduation, she moved to LA to pursue a new dream, to impact and influence the powerful images and messages disseminated by Hollywood, working in marketing strategies for Universal Pictures and NBC Entertainment. And then she transitioned to the digital side of the entertainment ecosystem in 2015, working across a number of tech and streaming media companies and roles with a focus on making marketing in those spaces more inclusive. When she's not at work, she's spending time with her husband and her son, co-chairing the Alliance Young Professionals Board, writing about race, and trying to get one of her many side hustles in the D&I and media space off the ground. We're very happy to have her back. Welcome, Kamala.
Hi, everybody. It's so good to be back. I'm loving this show.
Well, we're loving having you. Yeah. So we're talking about technology and social media. So tell us a little bit about how we could use the social media space, in your opinion, to help this overall, I want to say the fight against racism, it's
a fight.
Yeah, it's a fight. It's a struggle. So
it's a fight. Yeah. So that's a great question. I mean, for me, I think there's sort of two ways. So the first is really to use your voice. So that's been the way that I've really leveraged social media. You know, I remember very vividly the day that the Trayvon Martin verdict came out, and I was just so distraught. And I really think that I looked at the country in a different way from then on. And what I did immediately was I went to Facebook and I started talking about how I was feeling. And I was really surprised by how many people started reaching out to me, Black, white, Latinx, all across the spectrum, saying, thank you for sharing your voice, and please continue educating me. So over the last 7 years, I've really been using that space very intentionally and proactively to share information about how we can combat anti-Blackness and racism, how we can recognize it in our workplaces, how we can think about everything that we're doing in this world very differently. So I really do encourage people to use their voice. But, you know, during this moment of what I've been calling sort of the biggest global awakening on race in a generation, like one thing that frustrated me was seeing everyone talking, to your point, and not acting, right?
Right.
It's like racism, like anti-racism is not a Facebook post. You know, it's not an update. It's not a profile frame, right? It needs to be a way of life. And so it really inspired me to put together what I felt like would be helpful to people in terms of how to be active in the fight. So I know I shared it with you, Adrian Young, so feel free to put it out. But basically what it was is that I was recognizing that people were getting stuck, right? They wanted to be anti-racist, and yet they had no idea how to get there. And so I put this together really inspired by the marketing funnel. As a marketer, we talk about moving people from being unaware of your product to all the way down to being purchasers. It's really the same thing. I found a lot of people were just putting on the badge of anti-racism without really doing the work. So just to kind of take you guys through it, because I think it really helps you to point you to the next right thing to do. So during this moment of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Black Lives Matter really coming to the forefront, almost everyone was brought into the funnel at the awareness level. Now you knew about it. You couldn't say you didn't know about racial injustice. The next thing a lot of people felt was sympathy. They were sad about it. You know, then I think some people even went to empathy. You know, I started getting a lot of reach outs from my friends, many white, saying, what is it like? I'm so sorry. I can't believe you have to live this way. It's not okay. And it was like, that was helpful, but I really wanted them to know that you're not done. You haven't taken any actions yet.
Right.
It's like you need to keep moving down to reflection. And reflection is really about internalizing where you sit in a white supremacist society. None of us sits outside of it. So you need to be asking yourself the questions, hey, like, why did it take George Floyd to get me woke? Eric Garner, literally the same exact thing happened. You probably knew about it. Why didn't it move you? Who are your friends and why? What's your school like and why? Really internalizing that. And then I think the next step is where many people aspire to be, which is allyship. And they want to interrupt racism. They want to interrupt white supremacy. The reason why for me that's not the end of the journey is that often allies sit alongside people who are affected and think of it as, let me help you with your struggle, right? It's not about me. I'm not a part of it. Often they don't even do it by building community. So you'll see a lot of performative actions taking place where you're like, did they consult even one Black person as to whether or not that would be helpful?
Right.
Do you want me to work on Aunt Jemima right now, or would we actually like you to do something else? Right.
Yeah.
And so when you actually, like, for me, the bottom of the funnel is anti-racism, right? Anti-racism is not a person that doesn't like racism. An anti-racist is someone who is hell-bent on dismantling the system of white supremacy and racial oppression wherever it exists. That means making sacrifices. That means being willing to give some things up. That means understanding your privilege and saying, yes, I understand that I am in some rooms and maybe I shouldn't be here. Who should I be bringing in the room? Who can I be building community with? Who can I be elevating? So I think that it's really important for us to think about, especially for non-Black people, who I think many of whom are like, I want to be helpful. Sure. Reading about race is not helpful, right? You need to do it so that you know what to do. But to me, saying that your main action is reading a book, that's like a young child saying what I want to be when I grow up is in college. Like, no, like after that, what are you actually going to do? Right. And so I want people to be inspired that like there's always the next right thing that you can do.
Okay. So tell us one or two of those next right things.
Yeah, so it's been coming up a lot for me in the space of work. So I think a lot of corporate organizations have D&I teams, right? And the diversity and inclusion team has been busy, right? But I think what we need to think about is, what are they busy doing, right? So diversity and inclusion is really about inviting more people of color to the party, the same party you've been throwing, not changing it, but just bringing them in. And then inclusion is about including them in the dance, right? I think we need to be thinking more about equity and justice. So for me, some of the next right things that corporations can do and coworkers and managers and leaders can do is think about, where are you working on things that you actually need to be elevating Black voices and brown voices in? And once you recognize that, how can you move from consultation to actually leadership? So I've been pushing a lot of folks in my organization to really think about, why isn't that person leading this? Why is that person not ready? Who are you mentoring? Like, this idea of mentoring the little you is going to get you stuck, because we know what corporations look like. They are predominantly non-Black. So if all of the non-Black people are mentoring the non-Black people that remind them of themselves, we're never going to get to that place. And so my big thing is that a lot of companies are saying, oh, there's a dearth of leaders of color. They wish they had them now, right? I would say that there's a good chance you have those leaders in your organization already. You need to elevate them. You need to mentor them. You need to promote them. And then you need to allow them to bring you in the next generation of people that also can lead. Every time I've bet on a Black and brown person, I've never been disappointed.
Do you feel like they're truly being receptive to these ideas, though, when you're having these discussions?
You know, Dr. P, it goes back and forth. There are some people who have been like, thank you so much. I didn't know exactly what to do. And it's not a magic pill, right? I think the first time you hear that you are a part of a white supremacist society, and maybe something you've been doing makes you complicit, you feel a little bit like, oh, I didn't mean to. But to me, the people who are truly committed to the fight are those that can dust themselves off and say, you know what? It's actually not about me. Like, what can I do? And I found a lot of leaders who've been willing to. And I'm starting to hear like myself quoted back to myself as they're talking about, oh, I elevated this person and I've been blown away by what they can do. And I'm like, I'm not blown away. Every Black person that I know that fought to get to any corporate space that I know of, they didn't jump over lower bars. They jumped over higher bars. So are they ready to lead? Yes, absolutely. But of course, there are still people who, you know, stay stuck in that space of like just feeling offended and so disoriented by knowledge that like they have been complicit and a participant in the system that has been built. And for those people, you know, it's a lot of fragility. Yes. It's a lot of distancing. It's a lot of denial. But, you know, I have to invest my time where I feel like it's most valuable. So I continue to, at scale, speak to people who want to be sort of educated. And I work one-on-one with people who actually want to do things.
So what do you do with those people, though, in those spaces that might not necessarily be ready to to really say, yes, I'm ready for allyship?
Yeah.
What do you do?
You know what I think it is? It's like, that's why I think that this funnel that I put together is so helpful. The funnel does not call everyone to immediately go to like anti-racism. And in fact, you can't, right? You will not be effective and you will not be useful. So I think that like, for me, this is about what's the next right thing, right? So everyone presumably is at awareness, right?
Yeah.
But maybe you're stuck at awareness, you just know, right? Maybe the next thing for you to do is really think about like engaging with your feelings about this, right? It's okay to feel sad and empathetic. That can help to motivate you to the next thing. What can you be reading as you're trying to enter reflection? And it's not a one-way highway, right? Many of us, you will bounce up and down. In fact, I think it's a sign that you're doing it correctly. As you're reflecting, it should blow your mind and make you think about things you never saw before. And maybe you got to circle right back up to sympathy. And I've had people come back to me and say, you've been saying this for years and years, and I realize now that I actually haven't been listening to you. I thought that I was. I really apologize. And then you're moving further and further down.
Absolutely, down that funnel. So
Yes.
I thank you for that. There's one other thing before I let the both of you go. Michael, a lot of guests have been asking about the name of the app. What is it again?
Yeah, it's called policewindow.com.
Excellent.
So you can get it through the website or through the app stores. And before I go real quick, I just wanted to kind of continue the point. We also launched another application called diversitywindow.com as well. And so one of the challenges is that diversity data is hidden. Companies hide that information. Either they don't know it or they keep it internally. And so if we want that data, let's get it from the people. So you can go to diversitywindow.com for your company, and you can, at your location, you can surface what the diversity data is around gender, around race, across management, across the employee base. Because there's like you were saying, there's a lot of fear around these issues. But I want to get all that data out there. Say, hey, what does the diversity look like in these companies? And then once it's out there, hey, who's working on it? And the other thing is, there's a lot of employees who care about diversity. So companies that choose not to address diversity are going to lose out on these really talented candidates that want to be at a place that's diverse. And so getting that information out creates a financial incentive for those businesses too. And so the more, very shortly, we believe, because there's not a lot of data out there right now, we believe we'll be the #1 place on the internet for diversity data when you're going to a company. It's like the Glassdoor of diversity. And so that's what we've launched as well. And so we're excited about that as a way to move the needle for people as well. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I appreciate you both coming. Thank you. Hang around a little bit in case there's some questions later, but I want to bring on our next two guests who are actively involved in running this country, especially one of us. We're delighted to have her here. She's actually one of our Georgia state representatives. We have somebody also from DC who's doing a lot of movement that's going to share with us. And so let me go ahead and bring them on if we just hold on for our next guest. Our next guest is Representative Donna McLeod, who was born on the island of Jamaica, but grew up in Canada and moved to Georgia in 1998 and became a US citizen in 2012. She is a chemical engineer with over 20 years of experience in quality assurance, management, and engineering, and is now the president and CEO of Envirocall LLC, which is a quality assurance regulatory consulting company specializing in medical devices, food, plastics, and pharmaceuticals. She's the mother of a grown daughter and a proud grandmother, and recognizes that knowledge is the ultimate power that enables more highly informed people to make better decisions. In fact, she has said that knowledge is the most powerful gift you give yourself, and the vote is the most powerful gift we give each other. She is passionate about her civic responsibility and actually was endorsed by both President Barack Obama and Attorney General Eric Holder when she won with over 4,000 votes and was elected as Georgia State Representative for District 105 on November 6th in 2018. She is the co-founder of CANI, Community Action Network Initiatives, which is a nonprofit organization that helps educate people and inform them of their civic and societal rights and responsibilities, and was awarded the Georgia Secretary of State Outstanding Citizen Award in 2015, as well as the Sankofa Leadership Award in 2017. She is a fighter. She is a mother, a grandmother, a representative, and we're so honored to have her. Welcome. Hello.
Hello. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
And I would like to also welcome our next guest, because we're both going to be telling us about different aspects of something that I think our viewers all need to know. Our next guest is Ms. Nikel Allen. Director Nikel Allen, Esquire, is an experienced government attorney and executive with a reputation for good governance and finding innovative solutions to complex issues. She was appointed to a 5-year term in 2018 to serve as the District of Columbia Director of Open Government. Director Allen is an advocate for transparency in government and is respected and is a dynamic public speaker and presenter. Prior to her appointment, Director Allen served as Senior Policy Advisor and Counsel for the District of Columbia Office of Chief Technology Officer. She also served with distinction as an Assistant Attorney General in the District of Columbia Office of the Attorney General for 15 years. Director Allen earned her bachelor's degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and her law degree from North Carolina Central University. She is a member of the District of Columbia Bar and the North Carolina Bar and resides currently in the District of Columbia. Welcome also, Nikel.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Okay. So my first question is for Representative. Representative, I want you to talk to us a little bit about how the people can feel empowered to make changes. Because I want to be honest with you, there's a lot of people that feel like the government is not working for them. There's a lot of people, especially a lot of young people, who have said they feel disenfranchised in a way because they feel even if they vote, that they don't really have a say in what goes on. And so I'd like you to speak a little bit to that and tell us how we can make the government work for us.
So one of the things that most people don't seem to grasp is that the government is actually about the people, right? And the taxes you pay, period. There's like nothing in between that. And how we use your money on your behalf if you get a return on investment with your money. And so one of the things that I always say to young people is it's about the consistency of your vote. Voting every 4 years is insufficient. You are not going to get what you need done by voting every 4 years. Your local government, especially like your city and your county government, impact your life daily. And how I kind of summarize it, especially for African Americans, how I kind of really summarize it is that before 1865, actually 1863 in most places, 1865 for Texas, African Americans were in bondage, and those were actually state laws. And so the state has a huge power in your life. And so engaging in local government actually benefits you more than just voting every 4 years. And so that's one of the things I really try to get to know. I've talked about, the budget, and I can speak for Georgia. It's a $28 billion budget that we collect in taxes from our taxpayers. And as a legislator, my main job is to basically make sure that the money that we collect in taxes is used to benefit the folks that we are representing. And unfortunately, sometimes there are people elected that are not there to represent you. They're there to represent other interests.
Right.
And so that is why it's so important for people to get out there and vote consistently. Out of that $28 billion that we collect in taxes, 75% of it comes directly from sales tax and income tax. 19% comes from fee and another 6% from businesses. So you can see the burden of the taxes come from the people. And so if you're not at the table and you're not getting your voice heard, it will just be to the interest of the people that are there. And so that's why, even with all the frustration that I'm going through, and this has been a very 2 tough years in our legislative body, but even with all of that, I'm glad that I'm at the table, because we're fighting for the people that we know don't always have their voice at the table. And if you're not at the table, you are certainly going to be on the menu.
Okay. So I also wanted to pose a similar question to Director Allen. You're in DC. When we think about DC, we think that kind of personifies politics, but we also feel it kind of personifies a lot of talk and not a lot of action. I'm going to pose the same question. What actionable things should we, the people who are not in politics, be expecting of our leaders in DC?
Well, I think accountability is the most important thing that you need to be concerned with as a citizen, and you hold your elected officials accountable through your vote. So voter participation is key. You need to also make sure that voting is fair, that elections are fair. That's a big issue right now, regardless of where you're standing on the political aisle. You can contribute to the elections being um, valid. You can volunteer as a poll watcher. And what that means is you're someone who is there to observe the process. You can also, on election day, decide that you want to help out with a particular campaign, regardless of what your party is. That is another way to ensure that elections are open and fair and you're involved in the process. On the state and local level, you need to know, and it's been discussed previously in the show, who are the key players? Who do I need to know in my jurisdiction? Of course, you need to know your legislators. Those folks control the money, as was just said. So the people who control the money are going to control the agenda. So if you have a specific concern, you need to let the person in your state legislature and also your local city council or county council know of your concerns and know how your budget and your money is being spent. One thing you can do on the executive side, we've talked a lot about U.S. attorneys or the attorneys here locally, the district attorneys and judges. You can file what's called a Freedom of Information Act request on the executive branch. What that is a request for documents and records. So you can find out directly, how's my money being spent? You can find out what are the policies that are controlling how they're acting in my community. That's another, way you can get involved. And again, they're here to serve you as a citizen. So communicating with them is key, and letting them know your concerns is key. And if your elected officials are not performing in a way that is getting you results personally as a citizen, you should definitely get involved and make sure that they're replaced with someone else. Or if you have the desire to do so, run for office yourself.
That's a very good point. That's important that we note that that's that option too, because somebody in my family was saying, all these people making noise about what they don't like in officials, maybe you need to be an official, maybe you need to run. Which brings me back to Representative Donna. You had something you wanted to share with our viewers about justice for all. And so I was able to incorporate it, and I wondered if you wanted to say a few words about it.
So the reason why we did this, I'm part of the Democratic elected caucus. And as you know, we've had even an issue here with Mr. Aubrey. And so we went to task and we said, look, we're going to start to look at some legislation that we think could make an impact. And one of the things I want to say about legislation, especially for African Americans, we were not at the table at the incept of this country. So we're kind of a little bit behind, but we need to get caught up, and we need to really have people at the table that, can make those changes. And I agree. If you don't like what you see, step up and run. I've also said it to the young people that were out there with Black Lives Matter. You can't just keep marching and yelling and screaming without a plan. You actually you want to make sure you have something to say about what it is you want to change. The most incredible thing about the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65, from all that marching, was those two acts. They are laws that we now live with. And even though they've tried to destroy the Voting Rights Act, we have to fight to restore it and make it better. But the legislation that was put forward, of course, we passed the hate crime bill down here, and it took a lot. Believe it or not, when we were going through this process of getting this hate crime bill, the Democrats actually stayed quiet, because we felt if we said anything in support of it or made it even larger, the Republicans would have rejected it. So we stayed quiet in the House and got it passed to the Senate. And it sat there for over a year before it was brought up. Until Arbery, we didn't get a vote on it. And we had to push. And on top of that, when the law was passed, they created another bill, 838, which basically almost depletes it, because it gives law enforcement so much more power. So there's a lot of things. So that's why we have to have people at the table that believe in these things. We're repeal citizen arrest. That was the issue that happened with Arbery. This man literally chased him down like an animal.
Right.
And you talk about uncivilized, that was beyond uncivilized. So, we talk about stand your ground. Here in Georgia, we have a stand your ground law in Georgia. We should be repealing that. There's no reason for it. We already have several legislation that protect you as a homeowner, and you can use your gun. This is ridiculous. No knock warrants, which what Breonna
Taylor. Yeah.
So we came up with about 10 of those. I wanted to just touch on the thing. And racial profiling. That's going to take a lot more than just a law, because this is actually, a belief that, Black bodies are not worth the same. And so we have to really try to make sure that we're raising our kids to feel empowered about themselves, but also look at white kids and how they're being raised. And so that this is a lot more than just legislation alone. We have to do it in society, as a society.
Right.
Looking at, the anti-choke legislation, which was the issue with Mr. Floyd. So we put those 10 together, but there's a lot more. There's a lot of laws on the books that is really, really bad. We just, in fact, I'm on the committee to look at those laws, but with 40 days and with such drama all the time in our legislative branch, it's so hard to look at those legislation that really are harmful. It takes so much time to sit down and do it, but it's something that we have to be committed to doing. And again, law, unfortunately, you can't dictate people to like you or love you, but the laws do help you to make sure that people don't treat you unfairly.
Thank you. Director Allen, how can we know, and maybe even Representative Donna, how can we know about these laws? I mean, it sounds like a lot of work is happening behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. I didn't know about half these things. Tani, Sonia, did you know about these things? So mm-hmm. I'm wondering if we, the people who are not actively involved in political positions, could know about these things, and how could we know about these things, and what can we do to minimize some of that drama? Is there anything?
Yes, there is. Okay, so everything is actually in plain sight. It's just knowing where to go, right? We do have the house.ga.gov, and you can go there and put in any legislation or search legislation by name. Also, my newsletter, if you go to electdonnamccloud.com and sign up for my newsletter, you can I usually try to keep folks informed. In fact, my constituents say I'm probably the most transparent representative there is, because I do believe in it. You don't make decision in a vacuum. You make decision. The more you know, you make better decision. And I truly believe that. But yeah, you can go to the House website. There's also, and because I'm a Democrat, we do have our own Facebook pages. I have a Facebook page, and also we have websites for the House Democratic Caucus, and we place a lot of that information online. But again, when it's in session, I wish that more people came down so that this is your house. You pay for this. The Gold Dome is not a.
I don't think we knew we could.
I know.
You can. It belongs to you. You can walk up in there. You can walk in there. You can come into and sit in the gallery. You can watch us for the whole day if you want to. It is your choice. I think that
now a lot of the meetings are like we're meeting now, remote. You can go to see a board meeting, you can go to see a state legislative meeting, you can watch all of them online now because of the pandemic. So most state, local, and federal government have their meetings via Zoom or WebEx or some other forum that the public can participate in. You can generally find that information on their website. As Mr. Brown talked about earlier, there's a lot of data that's out there that the government releases, and that we need to be able to find it. Where is it? It's on the state government website. It's on the local government website. You know who your mayor is. Your mayor is very famous in Atlanta. She has a lot of information on her website that you can glean, what's going on and what meetings are actually happening. And I think that's important to attend and also to comment. So a lot of times, especially on the executive side, you're able to submit comments to people who are having board meetings or executive meetings, so you can have your voice heard and actually be on the record. Even sending a letter to your state representative about a hearing that you may be, that's in the record permanently. So when when history comes and you look back on the discussion, you're in it. And I think that's important. A way that you as a citizen can engage with your government is through the pen and also through calling. So you can also make telephone calls, emails, just letting them know where you stand on a particular issue. Policing, of course, is big right now. That's what we're all talking about. So how do you feel about policing? What do you want to see change? You can let your mayor know. You can let others in the executive know. You can write to your chief of police or your county police and let them know how you feel about certain issues. They all have constituent services representatives. That's people who will talk to you and make sure that you can get in touch with these officials, if not directly, just to make sure that they get the information that you're trying to give them.
Let me say something explicitly to everyone that's listening. You are the power. The first 3 words of the U.S. Constitution is "we the people." So the ultimate power lies in your hand. You can't scare a politician faster by telling them that they won't be reelected. And most politicians, and again, politics is about the act of persuasion. When I'm running for office, I'm a politician. When I'm elected, I'm governing. And the issue is for people to actually understand their own power and stop giving it up to somebody else. The fact that the people are in is really the vast of the government. You have that power to hold people accountable. And I will say this, if you're not voting, it's harder for you to have that power, because I'm telling you, when we go to run for office, guess what we're looking for? Those people that vote, because that's who can hire us. You're literally hiring us. And so you are when I walk into the Capitol, I don't give a crap what the governor wants to say. I don't give a crap what the speaker wants to say. The only people I'm concerned with is the people that elected me. Those are the people that matter the most to me. And if the lobbyists are the one at the table, the lobbyist's voice is going to be heard. So you should be your greatest lobbyist and making sure that you keep in contact with your elected official. I don't play games like that. And it's important for people to understand their role in this government. And I would recommend that people read the Constitution. It wasn't written with us in mind at the time, but it does have some good guidelines. And I think that at the end of the day, if it's going to be changed, we have to first understand what we're changing before we change anything.
Absolutely. Ladies, I really appreciate your perspective. Representative, I know that you have to step out, but
no, it's not. It's over.
Director Allen, if you can hang on for a little bit later for some further questions. I really like understanding what the government is supposed to be doing. And I love the reminder that we, the people who are not actively involved, can become actively involved. I personally didn't know that we're able to come in and sit in. I personally didn't know, Director Allen, that there are different people on a more local level that we should be writing, and that they actually do read, when we write them letters. And I like the reassurance that people do care about what we say, provided we're part of the voting population. So we need to vote. Thank you both, ladies. We're going to bring out our next guest. We appreciate you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, we're going to switch gears a little bit. We've talked a lot about the law, the criminal justice system. We've talked a bit about technology and social media. And now it's time to talk about some money, okay? We want to talk about how you can leverage your dollars as a consumer to help combat racism. So let's hit racism in the pocket with our next guest. Ms. Jessica Reed is the Chief Financial Officer in the technology space. She's actually the CFO for the largest online marketplace dedicated to buying and selling vintage musical instruments. Prior to her current company, she served as the Senior Vice President of Finance and Operations at Regroup Telehealth, where she built the finance and accounting functions. Her career spans over a decade, working in finance and operations roles, e-commerce, healthcare, and education technology for companies like Regroup Telehealth, Apollo, and Goldman Sachs. Jessica received her master's degree in management from Harvard Business School and a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Harvard College. And she's a very dear friend of mine. I'm excited to have her on the show. Please welcome Miss Jessica Reed.
Hi, everyone. First, thank you so much for having me. I've been watching the show, for the last hour plus, and so impressed with this conversation so far. Very important, very timely. I'm so excited to be here.
Great. Since you're one of my besties, I'm gonna let the others. I'm not gonna hog you. I'm gonna let the others go ahead and ask what is on their mind about money and racism.
Sure.
So what I really want to know is when, we had that whole blackout, whatever day of the week it was. I know I didn't spend any money mostly because I'm cheap, but like how much do days like that really do anything?
And that's a great question. And that's, that brings us, to one of the challenges with that, that blackout day, right? Because often with boycotts and blackouts, there's a lot of confusion around, what should I be doing? What should I not be doing? Who should I buy from? Who should I not buy from? Particularly with that blackout day, the point there, was to create, space for Black voices to amplify the fight against racism. It didn't mean, it wasn't that we didn't want folks to spend money. We wanted folks to amplify Black voices. We wanted people to spend money with Black businesses. And, what happened was there was frankly a lot of confusion, right? And so, from that particular incident, it's hard to really see how effective it was because all of us were kind of going in different directions. Like some people just put up the Black square and didn't do anything. Some people, went about their business the same way. Yeah, it's not always easy to really participate and for that to be effective unless we know exactly where we have to be and what we have to do and where we need to show up. There was definitely some confusion around that particular effort.
And how do we galvanize people to really even be consistent with that? So it's great to say, hey, we're going to do it one day, because it does take some time even to look, to do some research. But what about even just being consistent in that moving forward? How do we do that?
I think the first part is just education, right? The reality is that there are 50 million Black people in the US. We spend well over $1 trillion. So like just knowing and understanding that we do have purchasing power, that's real, right? And even if a fraction of those dollars, were to shift to Black owned businesses, say, that in itself could do a lot to combat racism just from the standpoint, of the economic impact, right? And so just understanding that we do, have that power in itself. I don't know if everyone understands the true power that we wield as a group of consumers, so that's first. I think the next part is, there's two parts of it. One is, and I'm focusing a lot on, fighting racism, through supporting Black businesses, and working on the allocation of resources, because Black people, disproportionately, have lower incomes because of systemic racism and white supremacy. And so when we think about that, those Black-owned businesses, should do more to identify themselves as Black-owned businesses, right? I think that's also a challenge. And, where we are right now, in terms of how consumption works in the United States, we have a very unique system where a handful of very large, intractable, powerful companies control most of what we consume and how we consume it, right? Think about Amazon, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, companies like that that decide the messages we see, how we see them, how often we see them, and what we actually purchase. So it's important for Black businesses to somehow, be a part of these platforms, right? Like you should be using Google and Facebook to reach customers, right? If you can be on a marketplace like Amazon, you reach lots of customers. That's one way. I think us as individuals and consumers also have work to do, right? And we have a certain, particularly with the pandemic, we've grown accustomed to a certain way of consuming and purchasing, right? Particularly with the pandemic where we can't go to a retail outlet.
Right.
Everything is expected to be below a certain price with free shipping, and it's supposed to arrive in 2 days. Like that's just where we are right now, right? And that's what we expect. I think as individuals and consumers, we have to be willing to let go, of some of that convenience to really support Black-owned businesses, right? We may need to do things like download apps like Buy Black or Official Black Wall Street.
Is that an actual app? Buy Black?
Buy Black is an app. Official Black Wall Street is an app that identify Black-owned businesses in cities where you live, right? And so that's something that, we also have to be willing to do. Maybe not go and reach for Amazon Prime when you need something immediately. Maybe not take, whatever comes up on the first line or two of that Google search, but really, take some time to look in your networks and really identify, Black-owned businesses.
So I did want to ask a quick question. So currently I live in Atlanta, as all of us do, but I spent 12 years in Arkansas. I don't know if you've had the pleasure of going to Arkansas.
Not yet.
It's a lot of rural, and it's not a lot of color. What would you say to people there who want to help out?
And that's a great question. If there aren't a lot of Black-owned businesses, I think that you should still work to align yourselves with businesses that are on the right side of this particular issue. And to be clear, it's not a political issue. It's a civil rights issue. It's a human rights issue. And I think, one thing that I've noticed, with the strength of social media, those brands and those companies, that have had missteps as it relates to who they may choose to be in commercials or who they may form relationships with, Black Twitter will really call them out, right? And so, just if you can't go out and support a local Black-owned businesses, really make sure that when you are spending your dollars, that you're aligning with companies, as I mentioned, that are on the right side, of this issue.
And then also from the standpoint of, even if we can maybe consistently do this and empower these Black businesses, moving forward and helping with the disparity of small business loans going to Blacks, and people of color, women of color, and trying to work on even helping and making a more robust system in aiding in that. I mean, what are your thoughts on that when it comes to even trying to open up small businesses or Black-owned businesses and us getting a fair share of the loans that are out there?
So that's a great question, and it comes down to what's been said earlier in the conversation. Voting is really, really important, right? And there are dollars, that are allocated to those types of services. In addition, it's a function of the government, to fight discrimination in lending practices, and making sure that banks and lending organizations are above board. And so voting really touches on that as well. And I think, a lot of the growth that's spurred by, building Black businesses, comes from public and private partnerships. So who you put in power can have a big impact on that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jessica.
Thank you.
Right. It sounds like we can wield our dollars. Money talks, as we've learned. It seems like that is still the truth. And it seems like we need to be a little bit more creative and a little bit more patient in ways to support Black businesses, especially in this kind of expectation economy where we expect things like at our doorstep like this. So I appreciate your insight on that. Hang out a little bit in case there are a few more questions. I want to bring on our last two guests. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So Michael Konu is a rising sophomore at the University of Pennsylvania. He plans to attend medical school after graduation. And in his senior year at Grayson High School, Michael was chosen to represent the state of Georgia for the prestigious American Legion Boys Nation, which features 2 representatives from each state. The representatives attend a week-long conference in Washington, D.C., where they receive education on the structure and function of the federal government and even propose their own national policies. This summer, Michael was selected to participate in a research fellowship focused on health service research and centered on alleviating disparities in healthcare, delivery, and outcome. He stands poised to make a difference in this world, and we hope to learn from his youthful perspective, recognizing that we're all in this fight together, and we want to get that perspective too. He's going to be joined by our own Lindsay Harper. Lindsay Harper is actually one of our production team, and a lot of times helps to keep this show on focus. She began her work in environmental, economic, and social justice in 2013 with the launch of her flagship global initiative, green going forward. She recognized then that there's a need to engage diverse communities through various collaborations, including new media, small businesses, and the nonprofit sector. She was appointed to the position of Executive Director for Georgia WAND, which stands for Women's Action for New Directions, in 2018, and is actually the first African-American woman to hold that position. She's a native of Atlanta, Georgia, and a second-generation graduate of Howard University in DC, and also holds dual Masters of Business Administration degrees from Georgia State and the Paris Sorbonne University. We welcome them both. Hello, hello.
Hi, hello. Thank you for having the opportunity for us to just talk here.
Excellent. So the reason I brought you all on is because I hear a lot about this, and I see Morgan's here too. We'll talk about this because we've talked about this, Morgan, how a lot of the movement it's kind of fractured. So what I mean by that is you'll see, there's younger people who tend to be in the younger demographic like yourself, Michael, who are out in the streets and they're protesting. And it's not to say that there aren't people who are older. It's just that it tends to be, that's what we see. And then we see a lot of things on the political level, but we don't hear about the grassroots movement, Lindsay, the movements that are taking place that help to strengthen communities and help to also combat systemic racism. And so that's why I brought you both on here. And we'll start with Lindsay, if you can talk a little bit to our viewers about how more tangible grassroots organizations can help in this fight.
Sure. So firstly, I'm just really excited to be on this side of the camera this go around. Thank you for having me, y'all. I'm really excited to share about the work that I do, like for my day job. So I am a National Core Support Team Coordinator for Arm in Arm. It is a movement that's really looking to ignite a transformational era to end the climate crisis, centering racial and economic justice. A lot of what we've talked about a lot with racism and the economic crisis that we're finding ourselves right now is actually because of climate and the economic system that allowed for the climate crisis to exist. A lot of folks don't necessarily see all of these individual issues as being intersectional.
Right.
So the work that I'm doing is really to help train folks to connect the dots to the societal ills that they see, which includes the racial injustice, which includes the economic injustice, which includes the environmental justice issues that have been going on, and how they are connected to our system, which essentially values money over people's bodies, right? At the end of the day, it's profits over people. And so that allows for an extractive energy economy that is both susceptible to and contributes to climate change, such as the first new nuclear energy construction in this country in 40 years, which is happening in the state of Georgia. A lot of people don't know about that.
No, we don't. I certainly didn't.
Sure.
Michael, how do you feel that people in your demographic feel that they're part of this fight, that there's a role, or do you think that there's a little bit of division between, say, like the older either politicians or civil rights activists and the younger generation who are more involved in, say, Black Lives Matter?
I think that's a great question. I would say that there is a sense of separation and division. I think the general goals of a more equitable and equal United States is what both groups share. But I think my demographic has a different viewpoint on how we arrive there, and also what the central issues of the movement should be. With older generations, with the civil rights movement and voting rights acts and things of those sorts, there's a really macro focus on how do we offer the rights that America promises to certain people, to all people. Versus I think in my demographic, the issues are more focused, right? They're more minute, they're more detailed, and I think oriented on policy that is longstanding, that was able to go and withstand civil rights movements of the 1960s and 70s and still exist today, showing how entrenched they are. So I think there's a difference of focus on policy issues, but we do share a common goal of trying to create a more equitable United States.
Cool. How do you think that we can support you? Like we who are maybe not 19 to 25 anymore, support younger people and bring you into voting, especially because we've heard from several of our guests that that's the key. I think everyone, right down to our financial guru, has said, you got to vote. Voting matters. Yes. How can we get this generation to vote, do you think?
Yeah, I think me personally speaking, just from friends and also being in tune with people around my age group, there's a lot of apathy around voting. My generation feels like the system doesn't work and doesn't reflect our priorities and our preferences. And as a result, people become disengaged. People don't think that there's a point in voting, right? Because your vote doesn't reflect in policy change. In 2 years, the same policies that you have problems with now will exist. In 4 years, they'll exist. In 8 years, they'll exist. So I think that it's twofold, right? One of those points is centered on us and my demographic and my age group, fighting that apathy and still being determined to go and secure the rights and privileges that everyone in America should deserve. But also secondarily, I would say that engaging all people and all parts of the movement in terms of policy discussions. I would give an example of education reform. Oftentimes we talk about how do we expand access to education, how do we help underserved schools and teachers, right? But I think sometimes in that discussion, things that are lacking are how do we fight disparities in punishment in education? How do we fight disparities where you have in Gwinnett County, right? More African American kids are expelled, suspended, put in detention than any other group, but we're also one of the most diverse groups in the counties in the United States. How do you center those points and those focuses as part of the conversation? So I think involving us and involving our priorities in the conversation is a key way in bringing us back into the fold and really engaging us. If we feel like our policy preferences are really being upheld and respected, I think you would see a lot of people in my age group change their minds about voting and become more engaged in the democratic process because they feel like it's a process that's really inclusive.
Okay, fair enough. I want to actually, at this point, since you said that we're talking about inclusivity and so forth, I want to bring back some of our all our guests because I'm asking you what you think will help. And I want to ask pretty much everyone to kind of give their closing words within your sphere. I mean, we've had a lot of viewpoints today, right? We've heard about what we can do on a local level, on a national level. We heard from Representative about things that are already taking place in the legislative branch. I really do want to hear some last minute kind of take home points. So if I'm at home and I have my pencil and my paper and I'm a guest or a viewer, I should say, and I want to know one thing that you recommend that I do when I leave this broadcast that might help in this fight against racism from your perspective, please let me know what that is. We'll start with you, Lindsay.
Sure. So I'm putting some links in the Facebook chat. I would ask for everyone to get involved in an act of disruptive humanitarianism. I think that we can address the needs that we see in our communities and then force conversations around why our current systems are inadequate in the first place. It's going to take sustained acts of civil disobedience to really move to get the kind of policy that reflects the needs of the people. So I would ask that folks take the Arm in Arm pledge. It's the work that I'm doing. Take the pledge. We'll be scaling 3.5% of the population in the next 2 years to move some climate policy.
Thank you.
Sure.
Michael, I have you next on my screen. Tell our viewers what you think we can do.
Great. I would say specifically in terms of internships and opportunity, please advocate for people within our age group. I think oftentimes something that could happen is when a person of color makes it into that position, sometimes goes behind and, building that pathway is sometimes forgotten. So advocate for the expansion of internship opportunities past just Ivy League schools or select universities. Broaden the scope of people who are able to apply for these internships. Make sure that these companies that you work in are aggressively recruiting people of color for these opportunities and these positions. We're really talented. We're really excited to go and engage, but we really also need advocacy and opportunity.
Thank you. And we plan to give you that support, at least from When Docs Talk. Director Allen, thoughts?
Well, first of all, I would just like to take an opportunity to thank all of you for being here and for providing this information. I mean, this has been wonderful. Or just a take home for me is to participate in this election, find out a way to volunteer, find out a way again to be a poll watcher, make sure that this process is fair. Contact your board of elections or whoever is in charge of the elections in your jurisdiction and find out what the process is for these mail-in ballots. Find out, number one, if you have to mail it in, can you submit it on election day? Can you pick it up? Since that has become a big issue about our November 3rd election, make sure that you know in your jurisdiction what your politicians are doing about that issue.
Yes, that's an important issue, another current event issue that needs to be addressed. So thank you for bringing that up. Kamala, you're on mute, but I'd love to hear your take-home point for our viewers.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. This was a great conversation. I'm going to cheat and do two very quickly. First is I want everybody to become aware of and deeply uncomfortable in all white or homogenous spaces. This can be in your workplace. This can be at your church. This can be your neighborhood, your school, wherever it is. I want you to be deeply skeptical of these spaces because they are not accidentally homogenous. There is something that is preventing the inclusion, usually of Black and brown people, and think about how you can actually address that. So just start to notice that. As a Black person, I'm always aware of when I'm the only one in the room. And I've noticed that people who are in the majority don't often think about who's not in the room with them. Don't take that as just like happy accident or like that's just the way it is. Think about what is preventing it. And then the second thing I would say is figure out where you are in that funnel that I showed on anti-racism. I believe a lot of people do aspire to be allies and anti-racists. There's real work that needs to be done. So really challenge yourself to think about where are you really and how can you move deeper. And feel free to follow me or connect with me at The Real KAS1 to get tips and tricks and just connect and ask any questions. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Michael Brown.
Yeah, I guess the place where I would say kind of a takeaway would be if people really advocate for transparency and a continuous process improvement. So I think where there's opacity, there's room for bad actors and fear and lack of movement. And so I really would say whether it's in policing, whether it's in who's taking leadership positions inside of companies, let's shine some light on that and then start to make some movement. So I'd advocate for anywhere you can do that in community and leadership with politicians. I would advocate for people to do that.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. Adrian.
Yeah, my takeaway would be to engage the criminal legal system and all of its inequities with the same vigor that you would engage a presidential election. It affects your everyday life. It affects the people around you. And so have that same, as the young folks say in my volleyball team, keep that same energy, right? Just have that same vigor when you are thinking about the actors in the criminal legal system in your community.
Okay, and Jessica, what do you have for our viewers?
I mean, these were all great ideas. I think I would mainly just echo to support Black businesses when and where you can. It's not impossible. It may not be as convenient, but do it, whether it's a realtor or a wedding planner or a lawyer, or doctor, or whatever it is, or products or gifts. There's a Black business out there that provides that. So do what you can to lift those businesses up.
Excellent. And we'll put on our website some of the sites that you talked about, Black Wall Street, I believe, and all of those so that our viewers can access that after. I want to thank you all for being the amazing people that you are, for what you do, and for educating us and giving us some ideas, because not everybody is meant to do the same thing. We all have a role. We all have a position. Some of it is many positions. I can do things with my dollar. I could also vote. I can come to legislative sessions. I can encourage the young people and support them. So thank you all for coming. We're going to bring back our host and close the show. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I think we're almost all on here. We're just waiting for Sonia and for Yolanda. So while we're here, ladies, since we're here, we talk a lot about the different spheres that our guests or our viewers can help cripple racism. But I have to be honest, a lot of people have also asked me, what about in healthcare? There's a lot of inequities in healthcare. That's a whole nother show, and we're not going to get into that. But I do want, if we can, as we close and say goodbye to our viewers, just talk to them, each one of us, tell them one or two things that you think can empower them when they interface with the healthcare system. How can they help to fight racism that happens in the healthcare system? Because we've all acknowledged throughout this series, part one, especially with the stories, that there's a lot of unconscious bias that takes place when patients are coming in and they happen to be patients of color. So why don't we start with Dr. P, close us out and tell our viewers how they can help combat racism in the sphere of healthcare.
Well, I think acknowledge it, but also don't deny yourself health care. Take the time to stay there, ask questions, get involved, and make sure that you are an advocate for your health, as well as, hey, your family members. It's kind of hard now in the time of COVID, but you're able to call, talk to the doctors. Making sure that you're really engaged and stay engaged. Sometimes it can be discouraging if you feel like, wow, this whole system is against me. But no, do it. You owe it to yourself and to your health to stay engaged and to be an advocate. And ask questions. Do what you need to do. Trust your instincts when if you feel like wait a minute, something's just not right in how they're dealing with me. Stand your ground from that standpoint and do what you need to do to take care of yourself.
Absolutely. Okay.
I think I want to echo off of Sonia. I think one of the tools that I've been using a lot is calling it. So whenever you see a disparity actively happening, sometimes there's the embarrassment piece or the uncomfortable piece about calling out a disparity as it is actively happening. Absolutely. And so I pause and I always say, help me understand what is happening here.
Yeah.
So calling it in the moment and using it not just like a confrontation, but using it as a teachable moment. So I see here that you've been doing X and it's resulted in Y. I don't think this is fair to patient 0. And so those moments create something that's actionable, and it creates something that's real life that they can remember. Okay, when I see this happening, this is actually not fair. This is a disparity. It's something for me to remember because the context was so jarring. So I think that's one of the things that we can definitely use in the healthcare field to kind of help us navigate some of the disparities that we're experiencing.
I love that. We got to call it out. Dr. Yuli.
I think honesty, and it kind of just echoes what the ladies have just said, being honest about what you're seeing, even if that honesty makes you uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I think that if that is something that could be a takeaway, I say that just be so honest and makes you uncomfortable.
Yes. Morgan?
Use your voice. If you feel like you're being mistreated, if you feel like you're being, if you're not getting what you need or what you're asking for, you can ask for another provider. You can ask for another nurse. Use your voice. Empower yourself. You do not have to sit back and be mistreated. Use your voice and speak up.
Absolutely. And on that note, I'm going to say, in addition to that, be proactive about everything. So I think that we've already said, use your voice, speak up, be proactive. If you feel that there's something that you're not understanding, be proactive in making sure you understand it. Don't be intimidated by the healthcare system. I think all people, white, black, whatever, sometimes feel intimidated by the healthcare system and feel like they can't say certain things or they don't know as much, even though you may not know as much medically. As I think Sonia said, trust your instinct. So if something doesn't feel right, ask about it. Or if you feel like there is something that you're not understanding clearly, don't be embarrassed. Say it. And then engage your own support system when you interface with the healthcare community, please. So if you're able to, and I know not everyone has this luxury, but go with family. It's different in the age of COVID. You can't go back with a lot of family. But in general, even if it's over the phone on speakerphone, the more people that you have in your network who are listening to what your healthcare team is telling you, the better. Because it's more people who have heard the same thing, so everyone's on the same page. And it also humanizes you. You're not just a patient. You are a mother. You are a sister. You are a brother. You are somebody with a family. And so it sometimes can even override a little bit of that unconscious bias, because even if that provider can't see you as their mother or their sister or their brother, you're somebody's, and they see that. So get your healthcare team, get your social network there involved in your healthcare. On that note, I want to thank everybody for joining When Docs Talk. I hope you have at least 1, 2, maybe even 3 things that you can do when you leave us today, because we got to fight this fight on behalf of all of our ancestors, all of the people who have fought this fight for years. They're tired. It's our turn. Let's do it. Thanks for listening.